This is going to be my sincere pleasure to talk about this video game. I just finished playing Myst 3 for the Xbox. Pretty sure that it was on Xbox and PS2 and PC. I think this was the first multi-platform game in the Myst franchise. And I guess I'll go into a little bit of backstory about the Myst franchise, just because I find it interesting. So basically, these two brothers, I forgot how they got started exactly, but one of them was like a children's book illustrator, and the other one was like a programmer or something like that. And so they started making these point-and-click games, like black and white line drawing point-and-click games. You know, where you walk up to something, you look at it, you click it, something happens. It's basically like a slideshow, you know. If you click on this area of the screen, it'll take you to the frame that area triggers, basically. And they were doing it on like Macintosh or like some really simple kind of setup. And then I forget exactly how it happened, but they got funding from like Japan or something like that, or Switzerland or both. I don't fucking know. They got like funding. They bought like a souped up Super Mac, and they started making this game. You know, they figured out how to do, like polygonal, 3-dimensional images. And they wrote a story, and they did that, and it was like years and years of just grueling labor. And they were like, oh, we don't really know if it's going to work or if it's going to sell, but they had a feeling that it was going to be a good game. And so they intuited their way through it. And what resulted was, I don't know if it is anymore, but like the most popular PC game ever made, basically. And then they did a follow-up called Riven, and now this is the third game in that franchise. And I really love this franchise. Yeah, I guess the franchise. I like point-and-click games. I haven't played nearly enough of them because I don't have like a fucking Windows 95. I don't know how to do the nerd shit where you play... where you do the stuff to make it like I'm going to stop myself right here. I like point-and-click games. I like Myst. I like Riven. And there's a couple other ones sprinkled throughout that aren't in the Myst franchise that I've played and that I've really enjoyed. At least one or two. I'm trying to think of them. But they're fucking cool games, they're all puzzle-based, they usually have really good stories, it's all first person, there's never any other characters, so it's usually you alone in this world solving problems and discovering stuff, and they're not just puzzle games, For anyone who hasn't played one who assumes that it's just like all logic puzzles, like a Professor Layton type thing. It's really not, or maybe Professor Layton is more like what I'm trying to describe. I don't know. I remember that game just being like nonstop fucking logic puzzles. But Myst is like a really well balanced franchise, I would say, between like the graphics, the worlds, the characters, the lore, the politics, the mythology, the art, and the puzzles. It's all pretty fucking well balanced, And so I was pretty excited to play Myst 3 because I had bought an Xbox and I'm like, oh yeah, isn't there like a Myst on the Xbox? Wouldn't that be great, getting a point-and-click game that I could play on my fucking couch on my Xbox? And so I did, and I was a little bit worried about it. I was like, God, am I going to start this and then just not finish it? Because I have beat Myst like 2 or 3 times. I have never beat Riven before because it's really, really difficult. And I've started both of them like a million times each, And so I know that my rate of success when it comes to those 2 games is pretty fucking low, all things considered. Do I like them? Yeah. Have I played most of Riven? Yeah, I have. But they're tough. They're tough games because they can be pretty obtuse with how to get the ball rolling oftentimes. And that is like a real turnoff if you're not sort of invested enough, or if you're, well, I'll put it this way. It's a turnoff if you're not invested, but the only way to get invested is just to put your head against the wall and just fucking start solving puzzles, basically. Because once the momentum is built, you realize that the puzzles are all very illogical. Everything in the game is designed to work rationally. And so if you just know what you're trying to do, then it becomes really, really, really fucking engaging. For example, there is a level where you notice that there's a water wheel, and there's a chamber with a fan, and there's lava. And basically, by walking around this environment, you're like, oh, I'm trying to power an engine or something. I'm trying to power something that produces energy that is then sent through all of these cables we see going everywhere. And so you intuit. And once you have that idea in mind, okay, energy, I'm trying to get energy from here to here, I'm trying to produce energy, then a lot of the shit just kind of falls into place. And so I started playing this game a couple weeks ago. And I like this game. I like these games because on one hand, it's yes, the worlds are very immaculate. You get absorbed in them. But they're not so cerebral, It's not like Silent Hill where you turn the lights off and you are at the whim of this game to determine your heart rate for the next 2 hours or however long you're going to play. This can be like that, If you turn the lights off and you turn the volume up, it's a really great escape, because the ambient sound and the worlds are just very well realized in a realistic sense. And so you can really get lost in these levels. But there's something very cozy about playing this game. This one specifically. The other two, yes, but there's a little bit more danger involved in those, just in terms of the stories are a little bit more sinister, I've found. But this one was just so comfortable. It's a game you can play with the lights on. You have your notebook, you have your pen, and you're just trying to solve some fucking puzzles, And it's a great time. This game is broken down into 4 levels. The first of which is the hub world, which requires you to solve a bunch of problems, which is a temple of its own. And then there's 3 additional worlds that you link to via the hub world, which all function the same as the hub world had prior to completing it. And so there's 4 dungeons, essentially, with a 5th one at the end, But there's 4 dungeons. And there's puzzles. There's at least 3 puzzles per dungeon that require solving, right? It's not so cut and dry as that, but there are a number of puzzles that you have to solve in order to then unlock the next chapter of the story, I can't even describe the range of the puzzles because I don't know what category they fall into because I don't do puzzles, But what I can say is that they are all really well thought out. Once you determine what the problem is that requires solving, and then subsequently complete that problem, you don't really feel like you've been screwed. There was 1 or 2 where I'm all right, that was fucking stupid. But for the most part, the puzzles are really well thought out. And at the end of the puzzle, you think to yourself oh, goddamn, I solved that. Good for me. And okay, that wasn't so cheap. That was the most rational outcome for the problem that the game had posed prior to solving it. And so there's really, let me say this. Once you solve a problem, it makes you want to solve another problem for two reasons. One, it feels good to solve a fucking logic problem like that. It feels really good, especially after a lot of trial and error. And especially after sitting and thinking like, okay, I think that this is going to work. Like actually breaking it down and determining like what really needs to happen given the information you've got. Once you think it through 100% and then it actually works, it's a really, really, really fucking awesome feeling. It feels, oh my God. But then it makes you want to then solve the next problem because A, it feels good. B, the next problem is going to lead you to the third problem. And the third problem is going to lead you to the outcome of this entire level, you know? Like, and the third puzzle then completes the circuit because all the puzzles, whether it be 2 or 3 or however many are there per level, they are all part of one larger puzzle that then falls into place and then creates the final outcome, you know? Like, as you solve puzzles, little bits of the story are, like, dripped down to you. And the story's pretty fucking good, you know. That's one thing that Myst does really well. Myst does most things pretty well. It's a pretty like exemplary example of point and click games, but video games in general, in that the story, like there's never the story and the gameplay and everything is operating at the same level. Like there's nothing that really dips in terms of the games themselves. And so the story, like, is fucking compelling. You know, it's very compelling. The story in Myst is compelling. The story in Riven is compelling. The books, yeah, I fucking read the books. Oh, Jack, you fucking nerd. You fucking read fan fiction. It wasn't fan fiction. I gotta cut this out. But it wasn't fan fiction. It was written by the actual guys. The stories are always really good. And the story in this game is that you're like the guy, you're the faceless hero. And the main protagonist of all the Myst games, Atris, he's like, oh, you showed up. Thank God. I need you to go to this world and pick up this book and bring it back to me. I would do it myself, but there's a guy there who fucking hates me. And he's going to kill me if I show up. Or something to that effect. Right, and the whole thing gets fucked up. The evil guy shows up to where you are. He steals the book. He steals a bunch of books or something like that. And you're like, well, fuck. The level's on fire. You have no choice but to link to this other world to save yourself, right? And so thus begins the story. You know, in Myst, there are books, and the books are links to other worlds. The idea is that the main character, Atris, is an author, and the books he writes develop into actual worlds. Right, and so his whole shtick is that he is creating these civilizations and that he's the god character, basically. He's responsible for creating balanced civilizations where all the needs are met and there's enough impetus to like work to sustain the environment and the people and the blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a whole big fucking socioeconomic, religious, mythical kind of conceit, I guess. And so he fucked up. He fucked up in that he taught his kids, his sons, how to write books just like he did. And so in the very first game, Myst, you show up on this island and Atris is like, I'm stuck in a book. You gotta help me. My kid's fucked up. And it turns out his kids are evil and they go to the worlds and they like, you know, kids. You know, they've set it up so that they're the kings of all these places. They got slaves, they got prostitutes, they got the whole fucking bit, right? And so at the end of Myst, you succeed in like trapping both of the evil sons. The world is saved, blah, blah, blah. Second one is a different trajectory. The third one is like, okay, there's this guy who hates Atris because Atris's kids fucked him, right? They messed up his world, they killed his family, they did all this shit, and he wants revenge. And so the bad guy sets up this trap, you know, like if you go into this one particular book, then you are stuck there until you solve the problems on all these other levels, which will inevitably lead you to the bad guy, you know, and it's a trap set up for the main character, Atris, but the evil guy fucks up, he sets the place on fire. I end up getting thrown into this predicament instead of Atris. Thus begins the game, right? So you're basically trying to get out of this huge, elaborate trap that spans multiple worlds, tons of different logic puzzles and physics problems and shit like that. Not really. For anyone who's a physician. For anyone who studies or does, fuck off, never mind. You got to do a bunch of problems to get out of it, and that's the story. And then it takes a bit of a backseat. There's a lot of incidental stuff, like there's a lot of cool cave paintings or, artwork that you'll see in the world that kind of depicts like two evil gods like fucking over, a race of people. Like holding an apple in front of somebody and there's like a snake in the back of them. It's just like a bunch of like good, bad imagery like that. And so that's the story. It's pretty interesting. Like the bad guy makes a lot of appearances. There's actual actors, as is the case with the other games. It's pretty cool. Okay, that's the story. And the more you play, the more is given to you, blah, blah, blah. But let me talk about the pace of the game, right? So, hang on, I gotta kill a bug. Give me a second here. Oh, ow! So the pace of the game is like this, or at least the pace that I found. This was sort of my experience with it, which is the very first hub world that you show up to takes a pretty long time. Because that's the one that kind of teaches you, like, everything for, like, every other level, kind of. There's a lot of elements in this hub world that show up later. And so it takes a long time to solve these problems. There's a lot of trial and error that is required. And basically, you just start the game. Like, there's nothing that points you in any one direction. Like, okay, do this first, and then do that. Like, the way you discover what the first problem even is by, like, reading a notebook and then, like, paying attention to the diagrams in the notebook and then seeing, like, in a different part of the world, like, oh, I recognize that contraption from the notebook. And in the notebook, it's incidental. It's not like, so you move the gear and you do this. It's just drawings, like diagrams, I should say. And so that's your first clue as to how these puzzles will present themselves at the beginning of the fucking game, which is as like incidental like things, like hunches essentially that you have to follow. And so once you get that pace going, things become a little bit easier, but they're still relatively obtuse, right? Like the game is fucking difficult, And a lot of the incidental diagrams that you find, they don't solve the problem whatsoever. They give you maybe a sliver of a hint, but the rest of it is seriously like trial and error based, which I actually found to be pretty cool, A lot of the puzzles you had to break down, you had to think about them, you had to write about them, or, just jot ideas down that you had. But for the most part, a lot of the puzzles could be solved by, all right, well, why don't I try it this way? Why don't I try it this way? For instance, there's a level where you're trying to get a ball of ice through a track, and the track has 3 different sections. Each different section is a different part of the puzzle. The first part of the puzzle is balancing like this half pipe. And if the balance is off, the ice ball shatters. But if the balance is perfect, it'll roll across. And congratulations, you solved that part of the puzzle. And in one of the notebooks, there's a diagram of a balance, right? Or there's a diagram of like a pulley system that balances the half pipe, And you see that pulley system beneath the half pipe. You go over there, you can move stuff around. But there's different materials that you can put in the balance. There's rock, there's wood, there's crystal. And all of them equate to X amount of the other thing. Like one piece of wood, or let's say 8 pieces of wood is equivalent to 1 rock. And 1 rock is the equivalent of like a quarter of a crystal shard or something. So there's a lot of stuff like that where you're given certain information and the rest you really do have to piece together. And for a dumbass like me who cannot do math, that kind of stuff is kind of difficult. And it does require like figuring certain things out, like figuring out the ratios at the very least. But then a lot of it can be solved with trial and error. And if it's not solvable by trial and error, it's solvable based on like observation, right? Like, despite not knowing ratios for this pulley system thing, I can see that the track is on like a weird pivot when only wood is on the pulley. And then subsequently, I can see that the track is on the opposite pivot if there's a rock with the wood, right? So you can then begin to figure things out based on this revolving sort of reliance on the actual ratios, what you know from the notebooks, and then just fucking looking at it, trial and error. And that was really rewarding because at the end of this game, like by the final level, I was fucking whipping through stuff so quickly and suddenly everything seemed to click. Like I knew now like what to look for, how to solve these problems, not because they got any easier, you know, the game is played in any order you want, but because I was finally like, all right, I know how to solve these problems now. And that was a really great feeling, as was solving the problems in the first place, because problem solving is a lot of fun, you know. And I this is sort of an aside, but I never really realized how much I like doing it. Because I never do it on my own. I do it at work. That's what I do for a fucking living. You know, not to say I'm some kind of fucking rocket scientist, but, you know, when I go to work, that's mainly what I'm doing. Of course, I'm not fucking balancing ratios or anything, but it's like, all right, well, here's a problem. How do we get to the other end of this problem? But in my personal life, I'm like, fuck that. I'm not going to fucking do that. You know, that's not what I do at home. At home, I just yell and get pissed off at the computer. I don't try to fix anything because that's what I do at work. I don't like doing what I do at work at home. And so this game, for the first time that I'm recognizing, presented to me an opportunity to flex my problem-solving skills in a capacity that didn't feel like work. It felt like fun, and it felt like every problem I solved, I became a little bit smarter. I became a little bit better at solving problems. In that I learned about the nature of problems, I suppose. Like, you know, when presented with a problem, like how does one go about solving it? I just learned a lot about approaching problems by playing this game. And it was really rewarding. It was very rewarding because I feel smarter now. And I feel like there's a lot of joy to be found in approaching problems, I guess is what the end result of all of this is. You know, problem solving is not a pain in the ass. And I'm not saying that to anyone out there. I'm saying that to myself. Like, generally for me, problem solving, outside of literally being paid money to do it, just seems like a fucking pain in the ass. But if you just have the patience to go through with it rather than doing the fucking, like, thing that I always do, which is there's a problem, I just start, you know, the stereo doesn't work, I slap the shit out of it. My computer doesn't work, I slap the shit out of it. Rather than doing that and getting bent out of shape, just have a little patience, Jack. Getting to the end of a problem and successfully like trying everything and solving it, or trying everything and realizing that it's out of your control, is it makes you feel a little bit virtuous. It's pretty, I don't know, this was fucking cool. This is a really cool game. Anyway, so by the end of it, you know, I got better and better at solving these things. And I will admit, I used hints. I used fucking hints. If any of you can play this game without hints, then you're a fucking liar, all right? The instruction manual comes with, like, hints, which is nice, you know, and the way the instruction manual is set up is great because it begins with like very, very obscure soft hints. And then it's like, okay, check behind that rock, you know, if you really get stuck. And I don't think I really ever got to the difficult hints unless I was at a point where I really couldn't figure something out. And if I really couldn't figure something out, like the hard hints did not help either. Like whatever was their biggest clue didn't help either. But every now and then I had to use a soft hint, like specifically on the jungle level. It didn't touch the hint book whatsoever. But then I got to the point where I'm like, okay, well, what the fuck do I do next? And it turned out that I was like missing this weird like frame that I couldn't quite see because it's a fucking jungle level and there's just so much brush. So every now and then I needed it to get through a section that wasn't really puzzle based but was more like pushing me in the right direction. So if you play the game, you know, get the fucking shell out a little extra money. Get a copy that has the instruction manual in there, because it'll help. Okay, now a minor thing that I will add is that I really like this point and click game, particularly because it is not just frames. Like Myst, the first one, Riven, the second one, they were images. You know, when you look to the left, you're snapping to that image. You know, when you go forward, you're snapping to that image. There was no 360-degree sort of exploratory angle that you could use. Which isn't to say that this game is like developing that, because it's been done before, you know, even at about the same time as the first Myst. But it's really cool to see that this game is doing it, because every single like 3-dimensional frame, we'll say, just has more detail than you could possibly process, you know, at any given time. So it's a spectacle game. And a very, very, very incidental thing that I love about point and clicks is that when you go to the next frame, you have the little cross dissolves. Those miniature cross dissolves are amazing. And this is the only time anyone's ever going to find out about this, because no one has mentioned it to me, but I made a movie a little while ago, everybody, for those of you who are curious. And I would say that about 75% of the cuts in that movie, 50 to 75%, employ this exact same little crossfade thing, like this microscopic crossfade that you don't even process on like a conscious level, but that somehow dissolves one thing into the next. I really like this, and I went so far as to steal it and put it in my movie, everybody. Okay, to round out this review, I will say that the ending is really fucking good, actually. I don't expect anything from the ending of video games anymore. I really don't. Even the good ones just had the shittiest endings. You know, Silent Hill 4 had like such a fucking stupid ass ending for what was otherwise a masterpiece, you know. And so finally, and again, like Myst is just good. They're just good fucking games, you know. They're made by people who are like somewhat unsentimental about certain things, and so they just go fucking all out. Or, you know, on the flip side, they pull it in. They don't go all out. They go with a method that they know will work narratively, right? And the ending of this game is so great because it proves what you can do in like a first-person point-and-click game with only one other character in the game, like only one antagonist in the game. And it begins with this great puzzle that requires you to actually go through the instruction manual, or if you don't have the instruction manual, through the journal of the main character of Atris that you received at the very beginning of the game, that gives you a little bit of information about like what the predicament is and what happened, you know. They do that in Myst. In the beginning of the game, you get a little book and you can read through it, and it kind of gets you up to speed without, like in lieu of like a really detailed cutscene, for instance. And so the final puzzle in the game requires reading through it, picking out a couple of key phrases. Those phrases are then like codified into images. You put the images into a thing, blah, 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 and you solve a puzzle. It's a pretty cool little puzzle. It's not so difficult. And then you are confronted by the antagonist. And there's a really great dynamic that they set up between saving the antagonist and losing the game, saving the antagonist and winning the game, fucking the antagonist over and winning the game, and then like the antagonist just straight up killing you, you know. And it's all, and this is pretty standard in games, right? There's like 4 different endings, blah, blah, blah. But it's handled in this game in the most beautiful way possible, which is literally flipping 2 switches. Flipping 2 switches at different times. One before the other one after that, or the reverse. And I'm not going to fucking break down the entirety of it because it's something that, 1, it's a spoiler. 2, I would have to record the fucking footage of it, which maybe I'll do. But it is so simple, and yet it's one of the most thrilling moments in the game, realizing that you have the power to do it, but that you're at the point, the game has trained you to be at the point where you already know what's going to happen prior to doing it. You already have a sense of what's going to happen. And of course, you test all 4 methods out anyway, just to see if you are correct. And you're going to be fucking correct about it. And you win the game with the good ending, blah, blah, blah. But it was a really cool way to end the game. It was because it was so thrilling, and the thrill was all in you finally clicking with the logic that the game is presenting to you. And simultaneously, it's just such a cool way to end a game narratively. Not the 4 different endings, but being face to face with this antagonist, and then having to solve a dilemma. There's a dilemma. There's finally some kind of action that happens in what is otherwise, the most slow paced game in the world, right? And so it ends really well. It's a tight little game, it takes a little while, but ultimately very good. There's a 4th one that is also on the Xbox that I will be buying. I don't know if I'll go into it immediately, but this is a really good game. And my goal in making this video is for everyone out there who's familiar with the franchise to give one of 3 of the games a chance, whichever is most accessible to you. You can kind of play them in any order, but I don't really know. I don't know if people play these games anymore, or if any of you people have played these games. But I'm telling you, they are worth your time. And you know what? You don't have to be somebody who likes video games to enjoy it. I think that's the selling point, is that you could be anybody. You could never have fucking picked up a game in your life, and you can play this game and you can get a lot out of it. And I encourage everybody to do it because at the end of the day, it will make you feel... There's just a lot of accomplishment to be gained out of doing this. Yeah, that's it. All right, bye.